During a nationally broadcast civic forum, viewed in real time by an audience exceeding 4 million citizens, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez directed a sharp criticism toward the Vice President of the United States, characterizing him as a political official who condescendingly lectured working-class Americans regarding economic hardship from the lavish confines of Air Force Two. The studio audience immediately erupted into vocal amusement. Her political advisor signaled his satisfaction from behind the curtains, and within 40 seconds of airing, the digital recording of her sharp remark accumulated 15,000 shares across social media platforms. She remained convinced that she had firmly secured her superiority in the televised debate, but that self-assurance was shattered exactly 9 minutes later when J.D. Vance presented a single, unanticipated inquiry. Instead of investigating governmental controversies, bureaucratic corruption, or any of the familiar political criticisms that her briefing team had meticulously rehearsed with her, he simply requested that she state the prevailing average monthly rent in Parkchester. Parkchester was the specific neighborhood where she had resided during her childhood years, the community she repeatedly referenced during her public addresses, and the foundational touchstone she utilized whenever she sought to remind the American electorate of her working-class background. Yet, during that critical juncture on stage, she found herself completely unable to supply an answer. During the subsequent 7 seconds of uninterrupted silence broadcast across 14 live studio cameras, the carefully constructed political image that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had cultivated over a 7-year congressional career began to disintegrate. This sudden breakdown did not happen because her opponent had obtained classified governmental files or secret dossiers documenting illicit conduct, but rather because he relied entirely upon freely accessible, verifiable public record. Resting on the table directly in front of him was a portable computer containing Census Bureau statistical datasets, standardized FBI crime evaluations, and fundamental satellite mapping software, all of which reflected the empirical realities of New York's 14th Congressional District, the specific district she had taken an oath to represent. 12 minutes into the evening broadcast, she had commanded the auditorium with absolute authority, electing to deliver her initial remarks while standing upright, which was an unusual departure from customary panel tradition. She had spent 3 deliberate minutes analyzing Medicaid fiscal reductions, dedicated 90 seconds to the problem of stagnant household earnings, and articulated a moving sentiment regarding her mother cleaning commercial office buildings in Manhattan that resonated precisely as her communications strategy group had planned. Throughout those opening statements, she referenced the borough of the Bronx on 2 occasions and reiterated the expression working families 4 distinct times, projecting her voice with the polished confidence of a seasoned public orator. When she turned toward Vance with her characteristic head tilt, a physical gesture that had generated numerous internet memes and broadcast television compilations, her sharp observation regarding his administration reducing healthcare protection for millions of citizens triggered sharp, enthusiastic laughter from an audience that seemed to have already decided who the victor was. Up in the press gallery, a television producer from MSNBC was already composing a triumphant news headline about her intense confrontation with the vice president, while in the backstage green room, her communications director, Kofi Asante, observed his tablet screen with deep satisfaction, feeling assured that their strategic plan was proceeding without a single flaw. When the program moderator transferred speaking privileges to Vance, the television cameras recorded him staring intently at his computer monitor instead of looking toward his opponent, the audience members, or the host. His fingers hovered lightly above the keyboard with the quiet anticipation of a musical performer preparing to strike the initial chords of a concert presentation. 5 full seconds passed in total silence, a time frame that feels immensely prolonged when magnified by 14 live studio microphones. When he finally commenced speaking, his vocal cadence was controlled, unhurried, and marked by a flat Ohio regional accent completely stripped of theatrical drama. He shared that when he was 12 years of age, his mother had battled severe heroin dependency, a circumstance that compelled him to reside under the guardianship of his grandmother. He noted that his grandmother kept a loaded firearm underneath her sleeping pillow because their impoverished residential neighborhood lacked sufficient law enforcement protection. He argued that his comprehension of the working class was not merely an accident of birth, but the direct result of being trapped inside its harsh realities until his enlistment in the United States Marine Corps permitted him to depart for military service in Iraq. The vocal amusement in the studio terminated instantly, disappearing as abruptly as water flowing from a tightly sealed valve. A subtle transformation emerged across his facial features, illustrating a profound shift between the hungry youngster from Middletown, Ohio, and the Yale Law School graduate who understood that hard, quantitative figures could prove far more devastating than emotional storytelling. Resuming his address with cold, analytical precision, he declared that his purpose for attending the forum was not to exchange sympathetic personal memories, but to examine hard statistical data. As Vance launched a fresh spreadsheet application on his screen, Kofi Asante's feeling of security vanished completely within the green room. The communications team had prepared the Congresswoman for a conventional political debate by compiling 62 pages of opposition research that detailed Vance's legislative voting history, financial contributors, and ideological inconsistencies, equipping her with rehearsed offensive arguments and defensive conversational pivots. However, their extensive preparation had anticipated an adversary who would debate on ideological grounds, whereas Vance was refusing to participate in standard political rhetoric. Asante immediately grabbed his mobile telephone and transmitted an urgent text communication to the legislative director, directing the staff to extract local district statistics immediately because he realized the dialogue was shifting toward the 14th Congressional District of New York. Without lifting his eyes toward Ocasio-Cortez, Vance spoke directly to the studio audience and the millions of individuals observing from their residences, stating that violent and property offenses within the Congresswoman's home district had surged by 70% since the year 2019, representing a rate of increase more than double the citywide average. Acting on instinct, Ocasio-Cortez moved her left hand toward her thick binder containing color-coded briefing documents. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the structured portfolio, yet she hesitated to open it, understanding that no prepared document could provide a justification for a local metric she should have known from memory. Continuing his presentation of her district's socioeconomic realities, Vance pointed out that the local poverty rate stood at nearly 20%, which was 1.5 times the national average, while the local unemployment rate had reached 8.3%, exactly double the national figure. Furthermore, he observed that homeownership within her constituency languished at 27.6%, roughly 1/3 of the national average, leaving more than 7 out of every 10 of her constituents to survive as residential tenants. Turning away from the floor monitor to look directly at the auditorium, Vance emphasized that these figures were extracted entirely from public Census Bureau datasets and standardized FBI crime reports, encouraging the public to verify the facts independently. When he directed his gaze toward Ocasio-Cortez for the initial time since the broadcast commenced, his expression conveyed the analytical disappointment of a financial auditor inspecting a completely empty accounting ledger. He reminded the viewers that she had occupied her congressional office for 7 years, a period during which she introduced the Green New Deal, pushed for the impeachment of Supreme Court justices, attended international gatherings such as the Munich Security Conference, and traveled across the country on a campaign bus tour titled Fight Oligarchy. He observed that while she pursued these national and global campaigns, crime within her local district escalated by 70%, leading him to question directly whether she was even aware of that statistic. Leaning close to her microphone, Ocasio-Cortez attempted to defend her record by asserting that these difficulties were systemic issues resulting from decades of financial neglect, institutional disparity, and severe federal budget cuts implemented by Vance's administration. Vance interjected with a calm demeanor, observing that while she relied on systemic abstractions, his questions were focused specifically on New York's 14th district. He reminded her that she represented more than 700,000 residents who had endured a 70% increase in crime during her 7-year tenure, asking who should be held responsible. She parted her lips to deliver a reply before abruptly closing her mouth. That momentary hesitation, lasting less than 2 seconds, was recorded by 14 studio cameras and would later be analyzed by millions of viewers as a tacit admission of failure. Vance then read another inquiry directly from his computer monitor, requesting the current average monthly rent in Parkchester. Following 7 seconds of unbroken silence, he provided the answer himself, realizing she did not possess the information. He disclosed that the average monthly rent was $2,200, reflecting a 22% escalation over a 3-year period, and noted that more than half of her constituents spent over 50% of their income exclusively on residential housing. He pointedly reminded her that this was the exact neighborhood where she was raised. In the 5th row of the studio seating area, A female audience member wearing medical attire with a Lincoln Hospital identification card pinned to her pocket leaned forward with deep attention. Her name was Carmen Reyes. She earned an annual wage of $42,000, paid $1,800 each month for rental housing, and had cast her ballot in favor of Ocasio-Cortez during 3 separate elections. She was completely unprepared to hear her personal life story brought into a national television broadcast. Looking directly into the primary broadcast camera lens rather than the studio monitor, Vance began recounting Carmen's daily reality to the millions of households viewing the program nationwide. He described Carmen as a healthcare assistant employed at Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx, who shared a single-bedroom apartment in Parkchester with her 14-year-old daughter, Diana. He outlined her financial burden, pointing out that her housing costs consumed 51% of her total earnings, a situation that forced her to board a municipal bus at 5 o'clock every morning. The atmosphere inside the auditorium shifted from standard political silence into a solemn, institutional hush. Vance explained that Carmen had voted for the Congresswoman in 2018 specifically because Amazon had announced intentions to construct a major facility in Long Island City, located directly within the 14th District, which would have generated 25,000 employment opportunities. Carmen had intended to submit an employment application for a customer service representative position, offering $65,000 per year, a compensation package more than 50% higher than her existing wages, and had excitedly promised her daughter a more prosperous future. Entering a few keystrokes, Vance projected the economic measurements of the canceled corporate initiative onto the display screen, outlining the 25,000 prospective jobs, an average compensation of $150,000 per employee, and a total economic impact of $3.75 billion in annual payroll injected directly into the local neighborhood. Vance stated bluntly that the Congresswoman had successfully destroyed that economic opportunity. Ocasio-Cortez immediately leaned forward, defending her opposition by declaring that the development contract represented a $3 billion corporate giveaway gifted to the world's wealthiest individual. Keeping his eyes focused on his computer screen, Vance responded with 4 definitive words, stating that there was no check written. He explained that no financial transfer had occurred and no treasury capital had been expended. The $3 billion valuation simply represented anticipated tax incentives tied to future employment that had not yet materialized. He argued that she had effectively campaigned against wealth that did not exist, causing 25,000 potential jobs and immense economic growth to disappear entirely from the lives of working families like Carmen's. Opening a satellite mapping application on his computer, Vance displayed an aerial view of an abandoned, paved lot in Long Island City, surrounded by idle construction machinery and partially erected structures that had sat dormant for 2 years. He identified the desolate concrete parcel as the intended site for the corporate headquarters, presenting it as a physical symbol of 25,000 canceled human futures. He permitted the image to remain on the screens, utilizing the visual proof much like a courtroom attorney presenting an exhibit to ensure the audience recognized it as a tangible neighborhood suffering from economic stagnation. He added that the technology conglomerate eventually established a smaller office in Manhattan, creating 1,500 jobs, only 6% of the original proposal, without local tax incentives, and entirely outside Ocasio-Cortez's district. He recalled that following the project's cancellation, she shared a casual social media photograph from her living room demanding a public apology. Pausing to let the point resonate, he contrasted her celebration of 1,500 jobs with the loss of 25,000, noting that 57% of her own constituents felt the project's departure was detrimental to New York. Consequently, Carmen was forced to stop speaking to her daughter about their promising new future. Ocasio-Cortez parted her lips to begin a rebuttal, but hesitated. Her silence was not caused by intimidation. She had faced fierce opposition before and consistently retaliated, but rather by the profound realization that hearing her own ideological position explained clearly and objectively made it sound indefensible to the general public. Vance's vocal delivery shifted yet again, abandoning cold, analytical precision for a relaxed, conversational tone similar to an individual reviewing an amusing restaurant check. This casual demeanor proved even more intimidating because it projected complete confidence. He announced his intention to examine a social media post, turning his screen so the monitor displayed a verified statement published by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on February 18, 2025, in which she claimed that she traveled to the nation's capital exclusively via passenger rail or standard commercial flights, asserting that decent public servants avoid exploiting the general public for personal convenience. He allowed the audience to read the text for several seconds before displaying a contrasting photograph captured on Earth Day, April 22, 2025, exactly 63 days after her declaration. The clear, unmistakable image showed the Congresswoman stepping down the stairs of a Bombardier Challenger private jet at an airport in Bakersfield, California, accompanied by Senator Bernie Sanders and campaign assistants carrying luggage. Vance detailed that the aircraft cost $15,000 per hour to operate during a nationwide tour branded as Fighting Oligarchy, revealing that her organization expended $221,000 solely on private charter aviation during the first 3 months of 2025, and he emphasized the dramatic transition occurring over 63 days, shifting from public train commuting to utilizing private aircraft that cost more per hour than Carmen Reyes earned throughout an entire month. Looking directly at her, Vance inquired whether it was her schedule or her moral conscience that underwent a transformation during those 2 months. Recovering her posture, she recited the explanation her advisors had prepared for this specific vulnerability, asserting that private charter flights were necessary due to complex logistical demands and security concerns, while emphasizing that her campaign neutralized its environmental impact by purchasing verified carbon offset. Vance repeated the term carbon credits with skeptical disbelief, similar to someone attempting to pronounce an unfamiliar foreign phrase. He cited a public statement she made in 2023 wherein she questioned the insatiable appetite of corporate executives for private aviation. He noted that she made that critical remark 2 years before boarding private charters herself, asking why she refused to allow corporate executives to simply purchase carbon offsets if that practice truly resolved the underlying problem. For the initial time during the broadcast, the studio audience remained completely silent. Ocasio-Cortez lacked a prepared follow-up remark, a clever rebuttal, or a memorable slogan capable of dominating social media discussions. Broadcast across 14 cameras, her inability to formulate a response appeared as a tacit confirmation of her inability to defend her actions. Addressing the primary camera, Vance calculated that the $77,000 spent on 5 hours of private flight equated to nearly 2 full years of Carmen Reyes commuting on the early morning bus, all so the Congresswoman could tour the nation preaching against oligarchy. On her desk pad, Ocasio-Cortez scribbled a single word before firmly striking it out. While the camera lenses could not decipher the text, the act of drafting and immediately erasing a note demonstrated that she recognized her potential counter-argument was weaker than silence. Adopting a calm, systematic tone that made the forthcoming revelations even more damaging, Vance announced that he would examine her lodging expenditures. Reading directly from official Federal Election Commission financial disclosures, he presented a sequence of luxury hotel stays, contrasting each daily rate against Carmen Reyes's weekly income without adding emotional commentary. He cited accommodations at the Badara Hotel and Spa in Las Vegas at $3,500 per night, the Leo Kent Boutique Hotel in Tucson at $3,100 per night, and multiple stays at the Hotel Palacio Provincial in San Juan at $4,000 per night, pausing after each figure to remind the audience that Carmen earned only $812 in an entire week. The quiet pauses between his quantitative comparisons allowed the audience to draw their own damning conclusions without requiring explicit guidance. He summarized that her total luxury hotel expenditures for the year 2025 reached $53,500 in campaign payments, a sum representing 66 weeks of Carmen's salary, amounting to more than a full year of the healthcare worker's life. Continuing through the financial records, he highlighted additional campaign expenditures, including 14-course sushi tasting menus priced at $150 per person, upscale seafood dining along the Las Vegas Strip, and arena rental charges billed as official event expenses so she could attend a Bad Bunny musical concert. Placing his laptop flat upon the table and resting his hands beside it, Vance proceeded to read excerpts from 2 internal staff communications that would rapidly become the most widely discussed citations of the year. The first message, sent from a scheduling assistant to a travel coordinator, explicitly instructed staff to book nothing below a 4-star rating because the Congresswoman was particular regarding fabric thread counts. The second communication from the same email thread directed staff to prevent anyone from photographing the hotel lobby because the presence of opulent chandeliers conveyed an inappropriate political message. Directing his gaze toward Ocasio-Cortez for only the second time during the entire forum, the scarcity of his direct eye contact imbued his words with the gravity of a judicial ruling. He repeated the phrase regarding chandeliers sending the wrong message and asked what kind of message her lifestyle was transmitting to Carmen and the 720,000 residents of her district. Following an extended period of silence that allowed the tension to build throughout the studio, Vance questioned whether she genuinely understood the characteristics of an oligarch, listing private charter jets, 4-star hotel suites, assistants monitoring linen thread counts, and staff concealing luxury hotel lobbies from public view. Rather than explicitly labeling her a hypocrite, he allowed the question to hang unanswered in the studio atmosphere. In the backstage area, Kofi Asante placed his tablet face down upon the surface, refusing to pick it up again for the remainder of the broadcast, while an urgent, unanswered text message from the campaign's legal advisor illuminated the screen demanding to know who authorized those staff emails and requesting the original documents immediately. Rallying her conversational instincts, Ocasio-Cortez launched a forceful counteroffensive, leaning into the aggressive debating style that had propelled her from a Bronx tansive to the United States House of Representatives. She proclaimed that the vice president served an administration beholden to billionaires, the same wealthy benefactors who financed his political ascension, purchased his Senate seat, and selected him for the executive ticket, arguing that he possessed no moral authority to lecture her regarding working-class struggles. Elevating her vocal projection to the resonant cadence that had captivated large audiences nationwide, she recounted how her mother cleaned commercial offices to fund her university education, recalled her father's death from cancer when she was 19, and referenced her past employment as a bartender to liquidate student educational debts, fiercely warning Vance never to question her roots. The studio audience responded with hesitant murmurs and quiet rustling rather than enthusiastic applause, reflecting a crowd uncertain whether to vocalize support. Vance listened attentively without interrupting or shifting his posture, waiting patiently for her speech to conclude just as one waits for a rainstorm to pass. When he responded, his voice was quiet and tinged with genuine regret, delivering what felt like the most profound truth of the evening. He acknowledged the authenticity of her mother's sacrifices, but emphasized the crucial details she omitted, that her mother labored cleaning offices so that Ocasio-Cortez could attend Boston University, secure a seat in Congress, travel aboard private jets on Earth Day, reside in luxury accommodations, and employ assistants worried about fabric thread counts. He pointed out that Carmen Reyes also had a mother who worked manual cleaning jobs, yet Carmen did not possess a private aircraft or a $15 million campaign treasury. Instead, Carmen relied on the 5 o'clock morning bus and spent half her earnings on housing. He noted that while the Congresswoman constantly reiterated her mother's story to remind the public of her background, Carmen did not need to remind anyone of her origins because she remained trapped in that reality without the opportunity to escape. The audience remained completely still, engaging in a silent, collective agreement upon hearing an unspoken truth finally articulated in public. Closing his laptop with a distinct mechanical click that echoed through the quiet studio, Vance stated that the fundamental difference between her persona in 2018 and her status in 2026 was not increased strength or intelligence, but growing distance. He observed that with each passing year, she ascended to greater heights of privilege, while Carmen caught an earlier morning bus, concluding that this expanding gap represented the exact ideological divide she claimed to be fighting against. From her seat in the gallery, Carmen Reyes, still wearing her hospital scrubs after completing a grueling 12-hour shift, gazed at Ocasio-Cortez with the detached familiarity one feels when viewing a photograph of a former acquaintance. When the moderator offered Ocasio-Cortez an opportunity to reply, she chose to remain seated rather than leaving the stage in protest. Speaking without her customary rhythmic cadence or awareness of her audience, her response deteriorated into fragmented, defensive rhetoric reminiscent of someone arguing with themselves. She repeatedly invoked abstract concepts such as context, nuance, and the bigger picture, insisting that her legislative efforts within congressional committees were not always publicly visible. She relied on standard political filler phrases, linguistic padding that functioned as rhetorical noise when genuine substance was unavailable. The audience watched, with sober recognition, as she publicly struggled with the realization that her polished, 7-year political performance no longer matched her current reality, recognizing that Vance had precisely measured the vast divide between her persona and her actual identity. Vance refrained from further commentary. He simply took a sip of water and neatly aligned his computer parallel to the table edge, signaling that his arguments were fully concluded. In the green room, Kofi Asante ignored an incoming phone call from the campaign manager, leaving his tablet face down, while a message from a New York Times reporter appeared on the screen containing 2 simple words asking him to call. The host thanked the participants, bringing the broadcast to a close. Within 72 hours, 3 specific video excerpts from the broadcast referred to by political observers as 3 kills circulated widely online, inflicting severe political damage. The first segment captured her 7-second inability to state local housing costs in Parkchester, amassing 22 million views and propelling a hashtag about her ignorance to the top of trending topics for 18 hours. The second clip juxtaposed her February public transit declaration against her April private jet usage, generating 19 million views across both conservative and climate activist networks, and prompting a major New York tabloid to publish a critical cover feature titled 63 Days. The third excerpt highlighted the comparison between her luxury hotel standards and Carmen's weekly wages, accumulating 14 million views and inspiring widespread internet memes that resulted in satirical merchandise and digital photo filters superimposing chandeliers onto user images. During the first week following the forum, Ocasio-Cortez's office issued a brief 6-sentence statement dismissing the event as manipulative gotcha politics intended to divert attention from genuine threats facing working families. However, the press release omitted counter-statistics, district economic data, explanations for the private aviation, or references to the hotel email directives. In an era demanding documentary proof, an unverified denial functioned as a factual confirmation. While conservative news networks continuously broadcast the damaging footage, her traditional broadcast ally, MSNBC, hosted a panel discussion examining whether she suffered from a credibility crisis. 3 of the 4 commentators agreed she did, while the 4th suggested the crisis was impending, an assessment that confirmed her reputation was steadily eroding. By the second week, a quiet contraction in financial contributions commenced. Major campaign fundraisers in California requested confidential briefings with her campaign manager, reacting not to Vance's ideology, but to internal polling data indicating severe brand erosion. The Wall Street Journal published an exhaustive analysis of her campaign expenditures, detailing her extensive hotel bills and charter flight charges. Because these figures were reported by an established financial newspaper rather than a political rival, they transitioned from partisan allegations into established public facts. Simultaneously, the New York Daily News editorial board observed that Vance did not need to label her a hypocrite. He merely quantified the disconnect and allowed the facts to speak for themselves, leaving voters to question whether she had become too detached to recognize her own alienation. During the third week, Elena Vargas, a 41-year-old former public educator and Jackson Heights resident with a child attending local public schools, announced her candidacy for the city council seat representing the 14th district. Without attacking Ocasio-Cortez by name, Vargas launched her campaign with a devastating 19-word statement declaring her awareness that Parkchester rent stood at $2,200 because she still lived within the community. That simple sentence accumulated 2 million shares online because it directly answered the inquiry the incumbent congresswoman had failed to address. Nationwide polling revealed an 11-point drop in Ocasio-Cortez's favorability among independent voters, and a 6-point decline among young voters aged 18 to 34, her primary demographic base. Political analysts concluded that her future political aspirations, whether challenging Senator Chuck Schumer in a primary or pursuing a presidential run in 2028, had become significantly more difficult, noting that the thread count scandal provided opponents with an effortless, self-writing attack advertisement. In the fourth week, attempting to mitigate the ongoing damage, Ocasio-Cortez organized her first local town hall within her home district in 2 years. Promoted by her staff as a community reconnection initiative, The event took place inside a Parkchester neighborhood center before an audience of 400 local residents. Stripped of protective bulletproof glass, stadium-sized crowds, and the endorsing presence of Bernie Sanders, she faced constituents from Queens and the Bronx whom she had not addressed directly since the period preceding the pandemic. A 60-year-old woman seated in the third row, wearing gray hair and a hospital cafeteria apron bearing the Lincoln Hospital emblem, took the microphone. Speaking initially in Spanish before switching to English, she stated that she had voted for the Congresswoman 3 times and asked if Ocasio-Cortez knew her name. When the Congresswoman admitted she did not, the resident introduced herself as LSA, an 11-year cafeteria employee at Lincoln Hospital. LSA then posed a second question, asking when the Congresswoman had last visited the district without a camera crew filming a promotional video. While Ocasio-Cortez offered a response, the specific words were irrelevant compared to her tone of voice, which abandoned her assertive congressional projection in favor of an unmistakable apology. Although video footage of this exchange garnered only 800,000 views, a minor fraction of Vance's 47 million, it inflicted deeper political injury because it proved that not only was the Congresswoman unfamiliar with her district, but her district no longer recognized her. By the second month, her Instagram account maintained its vast following due to social media algorithms rewarding controversy and engagement regardless of sentiment. However, the tone of the comment section underwent a permanent transformation. Where followers previously posted adulatory praise, the predominant, most liked comment beneath every single upload became a simple, 3-word appeal asking her to come home. This phrase represented a heartfelt request from her own electorate rather than an ideological assault from political rivals. While hostile attacks can be dismissed, an earnest summons from constituents shadows a politician relentlessly. Concurrently, Saikat Chakrabarti, her former chief of staff and co-founder of Justice Democrats who had engineered her initial transition from bartender to congresswoman, was campaigning for Congress in San Francisco. Having been denied her official endorsement, he published a pointed commentary on social media, observing that their political movement was never intended to be about social proximity to power, omitting her handle because explicit identification was unnecessary. During the third month, initial polling data for Elena Vargas's challenge was released, showing the incumbent at 54%, Vargas at 31%, and 15% of voters undecided. For an established representative holding a secure Democratic district, commanding only 54% support against an unknown challenger possessing no national reputation was deeply alarming. Political strategists identified Vargas's 31% share as the Crowley number, referencing the exact threshold Joe Crowley had held before Ocasio-Cortez defeated the 10-term incumbent in her historic 2018 primary victory. The structural irony was unmistakable. The identical statistical metric that marked her rise to power now quantified her potential vulnerability to the same style of grassroots challenge. When the internal polling leaked to the press, media headlines emphasized that her unknown challenger had reached the Crowley number without prior name recognition. In response, she abruptly canceled 3 scheduled media appearances, with her press office repeatedly issuing identical notices, citing scheduling conflicts, a standardized explanation that grew less credible with each repetition. Furthermore, she ceased posting on her social media accounts for 72 hours. For a political figure whose career was constructed upon continuous digital communication, a 3-day silence functioned as a clear symbol of retreat. On the 47th night following the original television broadcast, at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, Carmen Reyes sat inside the quiet Lincoln Hospital staff break room, drinking cold machine-brewed coffee beneath the harsh buzz of fluorescent lighting. Exhausted from another grueling 12-hour shift, she stared at her mobile phone on the plastic table. Her 14-year-old daughter, Diana, had just sent a text message containing a direct link to the viral debate footage, a clip that had now accumulated an astonishing 47 million views online. To realize that 47 million strangers across the nation had watched her personal financial struggles, her rent, and her daughter's vanished future dissected on live television felt both surreal and suffocating in the stillness of the hospital break room. Carmen had already watched the footage 4 times since the broadcast aired, and with every viewing, her reaction followed an identical pattern. Each time the video played, she tapped the pause button at the precise moment J.D. Vance observed that she had never been permitted to leave her socioeconomic reality. With each viewing, the duration of her pause extended. During her 4th viewing, She sat in absolute silence for a full 60 seconds, letting the spoken truth settle deep into her chest. During that long minute of stillness, her gaze drifted upward to the break room notice board. She stared blankly at the cluttered corkboard covered in desperate overtime sign-up sheets, peeling hygiene instructions, and a neglected photograph from last year's holiday party. Breaking from her silence, she opened her social media application and navigated directly to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's profile, gazing at the follower count that had surged to 9.6 million. Slowly, she scrolled upward past high-resolution imagery from international security conferences, opulent photographs from high-fashion galas, and panoramic videos of stadium rallies packed with 36,000 cheering supporters. She scrolled past promotional photographs captured behind thick bulletproof glass on the Capitol steps. With mounting sadness, Carmen searched intently through the digital grid for an authentic visual representation of everyday life in the Bronx, Parkchester, or Jackson Heights, the real neighborhoods where 720,000 citizens labored tirelessly and expended half their income on housing. Finally, scrolling back through 11 months of international travel and elite appearances, she located a simple, casual selfie taken inside a local Bronx bakery during a forgotten campaign event. She tapped the photograph, and her eyes were immediately drawn to the comment section beneath it. Displayed at the very top of the feed, posted just 3 weeks prior by an anonymous constituent, was an entry consisting of 2 simple words asking her to come back. Carmen stared at those words, recognizing her own quiet grief mirrored in the text. Yet, she did not unfollow the account. Instead, she placed her phone face down upon the table, disposed of her cold coffee, and stood up to return to her hospital duties. Walking out of the quiet break room, she moved down the hospital corridor toward room 412, preparing to perform the physical labor of changing a patient's medical dressing. As she passed the window, she paused for a moment to look across the night landscape toward the illuminated skyline of Long Island City. There, situated down on the windy corner of Center Boulevard, sat the vacant parcel of land where 25,000 potential livelihoods had once been proposed. In the dim streetlights, she could see local neighborhood teenagers sitting casually on the concrete barriers surrounding the empty lot, checking their smartphones, entirely unaware of the corporate headquarters and transformative salaries that had almost been constructed beneath their feet. The lot contained nothing at all, and Carmen knew with absolute certainty that it would continue to contain nothing. In that profound clarity, she understood, just as millions of citizens across the nation now recognized, that the divide separating Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from the struggling families of New York's 14th Congressional District was no longer a simple matter of geographical distance. Rather, it had transformed into an immense socioeconomic chasm stretching between a private charter jet cruising through the stratosphere and the reality of a 5 o'clock morning bus.